So we just talked about messaging platforms with bots on them in the wild. And this particular panel, and I'm going to let each person introduce themselves, starting with Jason, and describe who they are, their job, and the relation, and why we formed this panel. And it is about resources that are hanging off a messaging platform, but this time within the business organization, in the enterprise. But
Yep, absolutely. I'm Jason Goecke. I came into Cisco just over a year ago when I sold my company Tropo to them. We created a new business unit that is now responsible for all of the API, bots, different platform capabilities of the Spark business messaging platform.
Hi, I'm Christina Apatow. I'm the VP of Client Solutions at API.AI. API.AI is basically a developer tool that allows anybody to very easily create and deploy conversational interaction scenarios across platforms for a unified brand experience.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Schoenbaum. I'm the CEO of a company called Redbooth. So think of a British phone booth. That's the logo, Redbooth. And what we do is we create a simple workspace in the cloud where teams could manage all of their work. So by the year 2020, half the workforce are going to be millennials, and people clearly don't want to use email to get their work done. People are starting to use platforms like Spark from Cisco, which is an awesome product, and Slack. Great for communications, but they don't actually help you manage your work. So what we do is we actually help you manage your work, your file sharing, and your communications in a single place. And one of the things that I think is interesting is the three of us have worked together to create an environment with a bot that enables you to communicate and collaborate in real time.
so roll with that a little bit on some, for instances or use cases, focusing on Redbooth's capability, because we'll work our way across.
Yeah.
And
So focus on our capabilities. So I guess visualize, if you will, a place where you can see what everybody in your team is doing today. And if you don't have that, you're going to go through hundreds of emails. You might go through your rooms in Spark. You're going to sit in a 2-3 hour team meeting. And so what we provide is a place where a CIO, a leader, a manager, or even a knowledge worker can just go, and in literally a second you see, I know what Jason's working on, I know what everybody's working on, so it's top-down visibility. So the goal is really to help you be more productive and focus on strategic things, not managing all the minutia.
Okay, and then Christina, then I keep thinking of Sergey's question. So is there a value to adding the conversational component to that?
Yeah, and I could be very opinionated about this topic because I mean, as he pointed out, all these bots that are coming out now are just basically another way to present people with a bunch of very simple buttons. But I think that the most important or the easiest way for us to communicate with each other is by talking to each other, right? And that's also the most efficient way for us to communicate with devices and other things. So I think that it's very integral that that bots especially are actually understanding human language so that it can, we don't have to have another set of commands that we need to remember, or it basically takes down a bunch of these barriers to working with that kind of technology.
And that's the natural language component, that people can use their own words to
Absolutely.
Invoke things.
Yeah.
But is it conversational?
It should be conversational. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that, I mean, I don't know what the point in doing it is if it's not going to be conversational. So yes, first we want it to be able to understand natural language and identify your intent. But then we want it to also be able to understand what you're talking about in context. So you can ask, you ask about, say, what were my monthly active users this month? And how about this time last year? And how does that compare? And so that you want it to be presenting you with that kind of information and understand the flow of the conversation and basically be like that human assistant that doesn't, like your human assistant probably wouldn't be able to give that to you off the top of their head, but it should be able to function that way. And that's how artificial intelligence is actually going to augment the future of the enterprise so that we can have access to that kind of information at the split second. And yes, to answer your question, it absolutely has to be conversational. That's extremely important.
Cool. And Jason, is that an overlay? You know, Spark has its own sort of language and imagery around, you know, getting a room and that sort of thing. Is that does it change sort of the terminology or how you see things?
Well, first of all, I agree completely with Christina that it has to be conversational. As an old developer myself, I'm still guilty of coding once in a while. You don't want to create an environment where everyone has to remember all these esoteric key sequences when interacting with bots or back-end systems or things like that. And what we've been doing within Spark is really creating a platform where people will now come to do their work. And it can go between messaging to video, to voice, and everything you would think of within the traditional collaboration environment. And what we're doing, as Dan mentioned, is really creating the metaphor of a long-standing room, where you can come in and out of that room, you can post content in that room, you can interact with bots in that room as well, and share content, and it could be one-on-one or it could be with a group of people. In fact, I personally use Redbooth with much of my team to manage our tasks and what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I very rarely, no offense, actually go to the Redbooth website. I'm always doing it within Spark and the bots that they've created within that, and that room context with my admin or with other people on the team as well.
So you stay in Spark, you invoke Redbooth. So if you think about what the last panel was talking about, that the ideal intelligent assistant is resident where you are, probably getting to know you better the more you indeed use it. And is that how it's playing out?
Well, I guess I could actually say I'm happy to hear Jason say that, because our goal is to make it simple. And maybe just to ask a question of people in the audience, how many of you manage your tasks and your work in email, on a notepad, or in your head? So
raise your notepad.
A lot of the audience. And so I would just say that managing tasks and work is anxiety inducing. It's hard to do. People suck at it. They don't like to do it. And in a meeting I report to Jason, is it okay to give him a task? Who remembers what tasks were created last week? It's a global challenge that people are universally bad at it. And so what we tried to do as a company was make it simple, make it easy, and we tried to do it with a user interface. We tried to make it simple, almost have a consumer look and feel. There's a version for Apple TV, but for us it got really interesting when we partnered here and built a bot to do it. And it was almost like a magnet for people who said, well, we're having this discussion, an action item came up, if I can have a bot create the task, it just sort of lowered the barrier to entry. And the first iteration of our bot was almost like reminded me of the early days of Unix, where you had to know exactly what the command was, and if you didn't get it right, it didn't work, and you became frustrated. So the team at Cisco actually introduced us to Christina and her team, and by making it more of a natural language approach, it was just that much easier to use, required no formal training. You could just say, hey, Redbooth, help, and it will tell you what you need to do. And you start your day now by saying, Redbooth, what do I need to do today? And it will give you a list of things you're doing, or what is Jason doing? And it learns on the fly, and it's much simpler. So it's getting back to my example of the millennials really permeating the workplace. That is how they want to work. They don't want to work in email. I think most of us probably figured that out by now. But a lot of these chat products are just great at communication, and they leave out the work piece, the context of what you need to do. And by introducing a bot, I think we've leapt forward, years ahead in the way people could potentially work. And I think, to use a baseball analogy, we're in the first inning. There's so much more we can do here in making it a better experience.
And speaking about millennials, how people are raised on technology. Well, not even millennials. What are the babies now called? Like super millennials or something?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Jason and I are too old to know that.
But one thing that I thought was really interesting is obviously I have, it's not obvious, but I have little siblings, sisters that are under the age of 8 and one that's like 4. And I realized that now they expect to be able to use touchscreens on anything. So they've grown up with touchscreens, so they're used to using the phone, the tablets, and so then they see a TV and they automatically assume that they can touch it. Yeah. And the same thing with laptops. And I think that in the future, everybody's going to be assuming, they're going to grow up with voice interfaces, they're going to be assuming that they can just ask it whatever they want, and they're going to be confused if it doesn't respond back to them and doesn't understand and follow their conversation. I just thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, and if I could build on that for just a moment as well. What we're focused on is really building that platform that's multimodal. So while we've been talking about the text interface thus far, You would have seen at Cisco Live recently, we talked about Monica, which is really Amazon Echo or Alexa sitting on our telepresence systems within the meeting room, where you have this ambient listening capability and using that same backend infrastructure. Take that a step further, you can also start doing that in other domains as well within that with touchscreens and the like down the road. So it's very consistent with that. And I think our challenge will be, how do you tame the signal to noise ratio when you have a series of bots doing different things in different contexts? So, next kind of over the horizon is, how do you create a bot that is a composition of other bots to kind of manage that for you?
See, and you can sort of take the premise that the enterprise is a form of controlled environment where we get a preview of what will show up in the wild. And, I've been an analyst.
Which is the opposite of China. But
well, maybe just the opposite of China, but it's a pendulum swing, sort of, sort of personal computers and home computers. It used to be when you left home and you went to your office, it was an upgrade. Then for a while, you got stuff for home, and then when you went to your office, it was a downgrade, and now you're carrying this thing with you. So we'll look for some consistency. And now I'm picturing like 8-year-olds who say sweep left. It makes like no sense.
I don't know about 8-year-olds, but
Sweep left. So the next step is so that this bot is resident there. Is it listening constantly, and does it intrude? Are we to the point where you're getting alerts where you don't even have to ask what's important today? You get a reminder, or how's that playing out?
Yeah. So do you want to?
Yeah. So are you referring to the specific integration we've?
Yeah, I'm talking. Yeah, you guys are doing this for real. So people like use cases. They
Yes.
want to hear exactly what you're doing.
So the nice thing about it is, so we're avid users of Cisco Spark.
Yep.
We use it for communication. Our development team is in Barcelona. So when I wake up in the morning, I know exactly what's been done in Barcelona before I even get out of bed.
Because it's talking to you
Workaholic.
subliminally?
I just get push notifications, and I actually get it in my communications platform where I could see, hey, like this morning we released a new report for CIOs, and I got a little message in Spark telling me who did it, when they did it, and the status of it. I didn't need to log into a product. I didn't need to look through a million emails. So I get real-time notifications, and I can say, hey, great job, respond with a question. And so it's almost this closed-loop system where the work and the communications are together, but I get it on my phone, in real time immediately. And I've never been able to work like that. I think it's great. And it's the three companies enabling that together, which we love.
Yeah, and I think that also touches on an interesting portion. Basically, there's two ways that an assistant can be helping you. So you can either directly be asking it for information. It could be listening and then proactively sending something to you. Or it can say, as he maybe mentioned, that it could be proactively reaching out to you with some kind of status update, and then you can continue the conversation in context from that. So, and that's a really important element as well.
Yeah, and one of the use cases we did recently that, amazingly simple but extensible is we had our global sales conference last August for Cisco, which is about 18,000 sellers, I think, all coming to Vegas, which is its own thing. But one of the things we did is we created a bot that interacts with our back end where all the sales content is at, which is called Sales Connect. And then go into a room that's one-on-one and interact with that bot to find content. They don't have to go to another portal, find it, log in, search, all of these things. It's just the bot doing that. And that's driven a level of engagement with our sales team that's been phenomenal. And they immediately get what a bot is and why it's useful. And you can think about if you're then in there chatting with a customer, you could drop that bot in there. And it could actually be doing ambient listening to the text as you're talking to them and prompt you with sales content that you could be giving them in the other room where you're actually doing that and vice versa. And that starts getting into care, areas and things like that. So there's a lot of, simple use cases that can be, built up on pretty quickly.
So architecturally, what's living where? So Spark, Spark I just think of as a collaboration platform.
Yeah.
Redbooth would be a bot app or...
It's a collaboration platform sitting in the cloud.
Okay.
And our bot works with API.AI, and which essentially ferries information back and forth.
Right.
Okay.
So we take in text as an input, and then
Yeah.
we're turning that into actionable data in the form of a structured JSON object, and then
Okay.
passing back. So they can use webhooks within API.AI, and I don't know if you are, but you can
Yes.
call your internal server or your web service, have your business logic take place there, and then it will come back to the user with whatever appropriate response for fulfillment.
And is there speech rec and text-to-speech response, or is all this text?
Most of this stuff is done through bots, but we do have customers that work with us through voice as well.
Okay.
Tropo's done some work on that side with API.AI. So.
Okay. And then in the last panel, there was concern about privacy. So I was asking sort of like, so is all this sort of within the enterprise firewall, so we're not really worried about people?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we've really been focused on as a enterprise class collaboration platform within Spark that then enables applications like this. And why it's important is all of the data in our network that a customer has is encrypted at rest. And we can
Okay.
actually extend the keys into their premise to do that. So Cisco doesn't even have access to the data in those contexts, and can decide when that data is shared with different bots and different platforms and things like that. And then also give you those kind of balance between what's best for the users and simplicity, but also InfoSec controls for auditing
Okay.
and things like
Good
that.
with
So it's very
InfoSec.
important when you look into the enterprise to do that.
Interesting. And then in terms of like hierarchy of applications, you know, if it's like a developer group and they're on GitHub or using Hubot or something, do those all figure into something that?
That's the kind of bot composition I was referencing. I don't think there's
Okay.
a good solution there yet on any of the messaging platforms
Right.
or things like that. Unless you have a single user interface like an Echo in your home, then you got one
Right.
bot that's listening. But when you can add multiple bots into a room, there can be conflict or
Yeah.
a lot of noise.
Sparko.
Yeah.
Questions from our? Oh, over here. Hold on, Amy. I got the.
I have a question concerning conversationality, or how you want to call it. I agree that we have to be conversational, but I was wondering, I think most of the people in this room are Generation X, maybe some Ys, but most of them maybe baby boomers even. So I was thinking by your question, Christina, that little children, your siblings, use touch screens every time, and I think it's mostly because it's easy. And I really believe easiness is a main driver of loyalty and getting people to work with you as a company. So why should we push people towards responding in text and really go into a dialogue? Of course, in chat or, chat or WhatsApp or things like that is normal, but if you're on a desktop or mobile app, you might even want to consider giving them these buttons. The person in the room previous session asked the same question. And we built a prototype a couple of weeks ago where we offered 2 buttons to show the options with icons on it, and people really intuitively just push the buttons without even thinking about it. So I was wondering, how do you look at that? Should we more go towards a textual interface where you expect the customer to type everything they want to respond, or is it more easy even to show it more iconically or with buttons or
Yeah,
images?
that's a really good question. And I think that the problem is that most of the bot creators now are just relying on the buttons. But I think that there can be a nice balance, right? If there's things that can be easier presented through buttons or for them to make a selection quickly, then yeah, you should definitely use it. It's a no-brainer. So all of this comes down to a design process, right? And determining, you have to be able to make some decisions for the user along the way, and you also have to be able to accommodate them and help them make the most efficient inputs. So in some ways, it may be more efficient for them to be able to select buttons. But in a lot of times, especially if they're interacting with a bot through a messaging platform, a lot of times you expect to be able to talk to it, right? And if it doesn't understand you, then it becomes extremely frustrating.
I actually have a question.
Go for it.
When I was an IT manager at NASA, I introduced
Nice.
agile development practices, and when we were doing Scrum, we brought in this kind of the software where everybody could see what everybody else was doing, because that's really important in Scrum, where you have, visibility into the team's activities and the velocity and all that kind of stuff. But people really didn't like that, especially the contractors that we were working with.
Who were billing by the minute.
Yeah, and I think you were actually saying, sometimes people don't. There's a hesitancy for them to provide visibility into what they're doing, and I'm just wondering if maybe some of the new interfaces, some of the new technologies might encourage people to be a little more open about that, or is that still a problem?
Yeah, it's still a problem, but I think the way you solve that is if the user's getting something back by interacting with it and providing that level of transparency. That's where you see the best success in that kind of change management. So it's important when designing bots or systems to say, how do I make this easier so I'm giving something back to the user while they're giving something to the particular context that you're developing on. I think that's how you crack that. But there's always going to be people that resist transparency. So.
My view is there's usually a reason why they don't want to have
Yeah, that's
visibility.
what I was thinking.
And herein lies the problem.
You should fire
and
them.
That's kind of what we're focusing on, is opening it up a little bit more, and it does take some adjustment for some of our clients, but that's where the productivity gains come in, where you
Are
build
you
that
allowed
much
to
greater
talk
tie.
about the productivity numbers?
Say it again?
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah.
Specific to
natural language?
It's a little early since we just launched it, but
Yeah.
generally customers say that they get things done in half the time. It depends if it's like we have one customer who is using Spark that's onboarding new employees. We're able to do it in half the time. That's really compelling. So it's, like I said, we're just scratching the surface, so I don't have a lot of data yet, but I would say the best way to characterize it is there's a lot of excitement about it. If I could just talk into Alexa on my desk and manage the whole HR onboarding process, it's just so much easier.
But it plays up that it's not just a technology challenge. You mentioned that you can get buy-in if you prove that there's a value to revealing that sort of stuff, but it gets tied up in the whole privacy issue. And as you plan these, do you contemplate some sort of internal sales effort or is it part of the training or the onboarding to get people accustomed to using it?
I think in general, that's a concern for bots or virtual agents because of the novelty of it. For example, when you add a new app to your phone, you'll go ahead and give it any permissions you want. Oh, have my social security number and my location at every time of the day and this and that. But because it's a new platform, we're not as used to sharing as much with it. But I think that will go away over time. I mean, of course, it's different in the enterprise space, but yeah.
Okay. There was another question back here, I think.
Mike is coming. Amy's really fast.
I agree with Amy that I think there are some privacy issues and just work styles. I think there's pretty well-established studies on differences in the genders between work styles and how open or closed they are about what they share. And also, there's obviously well-established studies on different personality types. So I don't fully understand your platform yet. It's the first time I've heard of it. But I do think there's some research to be done in how different people and different personalities would interact. Going back to the example earlier about the autistic children, obviously that's a group of people who are going to have a different set of behaviors. And so trying to be inclusive of all personality types, I think there's a lot of research that could be done in that area.
There you go. So,
agreed.
Yeah.
Without violating anybody's privacy,
Good point.
very point well taken. So, to sum up, we have about 3 minutes. I'm thinking, we have this snapshot of what people are doing now. If I went, left to right and asked, where you think this evolves into along two dimensions. One is, there's the productivity and the employee considerations, but in some ways, are we conditioning ourselves as humans to, the benefits we see when we're humans in the office extending out to, us in the wild? And
Want to go first then?
Left to right from which perspective?
yeah.
I assume you
Let's
were
do
left.
Jason first.
Right? Yeah. Okay, then I'll go first. So, I think there's a lot of things that this begins to enable. And as we look at what Spark's doing, we're really becoming a new platform where bots are the applications, and how can you extend those out and make those multimodal and the like. And to the point that was being made before, I think, as we get newer and newer user interfaces, the user experience is going to be very important. So you think about things like the Microsoft HoloLens and what that's going to presage out in the marketplace, and how you interact with content, workflows, and processes. Once that even busts out of the headsets into a more natural environment as well, there's going to be this balance between interacting things in almost a physical sense, and then how that actually translates into textual context and visual context, voice context, and things like that. And I think from a bot perspective, where we're headed really is so much work's going to be getting done, and you're going to interact with so many things, even beyond work, that are automated, such as automated vehicles, automated processes elsewhere, that there's going to be a fundamental shift that even goes down to the economic level in the next 10 years. That's going to be quite substantial once no one can work anymore, for example, and universal income and things like that. So it's going to be an interesting decade.
Yeah, all those jobs that I've always wished were automated, they'll finally be automated.
Yes,
like
exactly.
accountants. No, I'm just kidding. My whole family's accountants. So similarly, I think that it's obviously every single person has a very uniquely chaotic life, right? So you all have your own problems. You're juggling your own schedules, your work tasks, and everything. And so I think it's a pretty natural flow that you're going to become reliant on this, either starting from the enterprise space or starting in your regular lives. But the amount of time and the asset that it becomes to you as a human, it seems unavoidable.
But everywhere.
So again, I think we're obviously very early, but momentum and excitement is building very, very quickly, and we've had more questions about the bot that we've introduced than about any other area of the product. People want to embrace it, learn about it, experiment with it. One of the challenges we have, which I'd like to see more standardization, is every bot we build for our communications platform is different. And so standardization is going to be key for all of us to move faster and make this easier. But maybe I can answer from a productivity standpoint. That's what our business is focused on. We just see that information is sprawled everywhere, and it's actually limiting people's ability to become effective. And it's very hard to manage that manually. And I see a critical role for a bot and a series of bots to bring all that information together. And everybody, I think, as Christina said, is going to work differently. But if you have something that's flexible enough that could conform to the way you work and really help you work at more of a macro level, not down in these silos where all your files are, we're all going to become much more effective and really spend time doing more important things, not managing your information or looking for it, as people often do today.
Yeah, and if you even look back like 2 years ago when we launched API.AI, even to last year, I was going around and personally talking to all these different companies about how there's so many amazing relevant use cases for natural language understanding, either through voice or text-based interfaces. Nobody cared last year. I'll tell you that. Nobody cared last year. Come the beginning of this year, everybody wants to talk to me. And then come the launch of Facebook's bots platform, it comes with that kind of disruption from a big player saying, oh, okay, this is going to be a thing. And now everybody's like, oh my God, this is the biggest thing. We need to change our whole structure and we need to focus on bots. Everybody's focusing on bots. Innovation team, focus on bots. Like, that's what it is. And so a lot of it just comes with somebody actually taking the risk and putting that on track for innovation and everybody to come together to do that.
And the 800 number goes extinct in favor of Facebook pages.
Never. Anyway, as a late boomer, thank you. We have an assignment.